Toyotomi Hideyoshi was not born into privilege, nor did he inherit a legacy of nobility. Instead, he came into the world in 1537 in the small farming village of Nakamura, located in Owari province, an area now encompassed by modern-day Nagoya. At the time, Japan was fractured, with feuding warlords known as daimyos battling constantly in the chaotic Sengoku period. Power shifted rapidly, and death by the sword was often quicker than a natural one. Hideyoshi's birth name was Hiyoshimaru, and unlike most men who would one day wield national power, his origins were modest, painfully so. His father, Kinoshita Yaemon, was a low-ranking ashigaru, or foot soldier, likely serving a minor lord. His mother is often referred to by the title Amandakoro, an honorific granted later in life. But this was not her name, rather it signified her elevated status as the mother of a great ruler. Her real name was likely Naka, though firm documentation is sparse. While little is known of her early life, she would become a steady figure in Hideyoshi's life, embodying the quiet resilience that defined his youth. After his father's death, when Hideyoshi was just 7 years old, his family was left in poverty. Naka eventually remarried, but Hideyoshi did not get along with his stepfather. Feeling unwanted and burdened by his limited prospects, he left home in his early teens. With no name, no clan, and no formal education, the boy had only his wit and willpower. Yet, in a time where chaos reshuffled the hierarchy of power daily, those two traits would prove more valuable than any family crest. Hideyoshi drifted for a time, reportedly finding employment in various trades and even with local temples. Some accounts suggest he traveled as far as Suruga and Totomi provinces, taking odd jobs and learning the ways of the warrior and courtier alike. He absorbed everything: language, etiquette, swordplay, administration. He did not yet have power, but he was learning how power worked. By the time he returned to Owari in the early 1550s, the name Oda Nobunaga was beginning to dominate local politics. Ambitious and eccentric, Nobunaga had recently inherited leadership of the Oda clan. The region buzzed with tension as he sought to expand his influence, and with it came opportunity. Hideyoshi entered Nobunaga's service not as a warrior, but as a servant, a sandal-bearer to be precise. It was a lowly position by any standard, but Hideyoshi accepted it eagerly. He saw not humiliation in serving, but a foot in the door. The boy with no family name and no samurai lineage had taken the first step towards reshaping Japan. Toyotomi Hideyoshi's fortunes changed the moment he entered the service of Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga, a bold and often ruthless daimyo, sought to unify the fragmented provinces of Japan under a single rule, his own. Hideyoshi, still a lowly servant, became part of that vision. Though his first position was humble, serving as Nobunaga's sandal-bearer, his ingenuity and tireless dedication soon made him indispensable. Unlike most samurai who inherited their positions, Hideyoshi had to prove himself through action. He excelled at organizing supplies, negotiating with enemies, and managing construction projects such as building fortifications at astonishing speed. Nobunaga took notice of this strange, energetic figure who seemed to have no concern for status, but every instinct for strategy. By his late 20s, Hideyoshi was no longer just a servant. He had become a trusted retainer. Hideyoshi was commonly nicknamed Saru, or monkey, a term Nobunaga reportedly used regularly to refer to him. The nickname may have originated from Hideyoshi's lean frame, lively expressions, or nimble behavior. While the famous tale of building Osaka Castle overnight is often said to have cemented the name, it is more likely that Hideyoshi was already known as Saru well before the episode occurred. Nonetheless, the Tsunomata feat, real or embellished, further enhanced his growing reputation. Whether constructed overnight or not, the fortification served as a vital stepping stone for Nobunaga's campaign and a clear marker of Hideyoshi's brilliance. As Nobunaga pushed further into central Japan, Hideyoshi served not only as a logistician but eventually as a field commander. He led successful negotiations with rival clans, managed regional taxes, and gradually earned control over increasingly important castles and provinces. His most pivotal moment came during the campaigns against the Asai and Asakura clans, where he proved not only his military skill but his strategic patience. What made Hideyoshi exceptional wasn't just his capability, but his loyalty. In a time when betrayal and backstabbing were routine tools of political survival, Hideyoshi remained firmly aligned with Nobunaga. He understood that Nobunaga's success was also his path forward, and he invested every ounce of his energy toward achieving it. But even as he climbed the ladder of power, Hideyoshi never forgot how fragile his position was. He had no lineage to fall back on, only results. And with each success, he moved closer to something no man of his birth had ever attained: power on a national scale. The road ahead would be marked by blood, betrayal, and cunning, and Hideyoshi was prepared to walk it to the very end. In 1582, Hideyoshi's loyalty and service were about to be tested in a way that would forever change the course of Japanese history. Oda Nobunaga was at the height of his power. He had crushed the resistance of powerful Buddhist monasteries, defeated numerous rival daimyo, and was steadily consolidating control over central and western Japan. Hideyoshi, by now one of his most trusted generals, was leading an important campaign against the powerful Mori clan in the Chugoku region. The siege of Takamatsu Castle was a pivotal part of this campaign. The castle, held by the Mori's retainers, was built on marshland and well fortified, but Hideyoshi devised a bold and unusual plan. He would flood the castle. By damming a nearby river, Hideyoshi transformed the low-lying fields around the fortress into a lake, cutting off all supply routes and demoralizing the defenders. The Mori were left stunned. It was a brilliant, albeit unconventional, military tactic that demonstrated Hideyoshi's creativity and daring. But just as victory seemed certain, shocking news arrived from the heart of the country. While Hideyoshi had been campaigning in the west, a stunning act of betrayal had occurred in Kyoto. Akechi Mitsuhide, a longtime retainer of Nobunaga, had turned against his master. On June 21st, 1582, Mitsuhide launched a surprise attack on Honnoji, a temple where Nobunaga was staying. Caught off guard and with few retainers at hand, Nobunaga committed seppuku rather than be captured. The assassination of Nobunaga sent a shockwave through the realm. The master who had dominated the political landscape with ruthless determination was suddenly gone. The vacuum left in his absence was immense and dangerous. There was no named successor, no clear plan for who would lead the Oda clan or continue its campaign for unification. For Hideyoshi, the choice was clear and immediate. Upon learning of Nobunaga's death, he quickly negotiated a ceasefire with the Mori clan, even accepting peace terms that were less than ideal. He understood the strategic necessity delay would mean losing the momentum. With remarkable speed, Hideyoshi turned his army around and marched east to confront Mitsuhide. In a matter of days, Hideyoshi's forces covered an astonishing distance to reach Yamazaki, just south of Kyoto. There, on July 2nd, 1582, Hideyoshi met Mitsuhide's army in battle. Despite the enemy having had more time to prepare, Hideyoshi's army was better organized and highly motivated. The Battle of Yamazaki was decisive. Mitsuhide's troops were routed and he himself was later killed by bandits as he attempted to flee. Just 11 days after Nobunaga's death, Hideyoshi had avenged his master. But the true significance of Yamazaki lay not just in the defeat of Mitsuhide. Hideyoshi had acted faster, more decisively, and more effectively than any other of Nobunaga's surviving retainers. He had filled the void before anyone else could. Though still not a member of the noble class, Hideyoshi had just taken his first step towards seizing the reins of power himself. In the months that followed, Hideyoshi began consolidating support among other Oda generals and vassals. He positioned himself as the rightful heir to Nobunaga's vision, not through inheritance but through action and loyalty. Still, not everyone accepted this. Many within the Oda clan viewed him as an upstart, a low-born servant now reaching beyond his station. But Hideyoshi had one powerful asset that few could match: momentum. The death of Nobunaga had shattered the existing hierarchy, and in that moment of chaos, Hideyoshi saw not just tragedy, but opportunity. In the power vacuum left by Nobunaga's death, Toyotomi Hideyoshi moved swiftly and with remarkable precision. Though he had no formal claim to leadership, his immediate response to Akechi Mitsuhide's betrayal and his victory at the Battle of Yamazaki had positioned him as the natural successor in the eyes of many. But there were still powerful rivals to contend with. None more prominent than Shibata Katsui, a senior Oda general with deep roots in the clan and a formidable reputation. The political situation was delicate. Nobunaga had left no appointed heir, though his eldest son, Nobutada, had also died during Mitsuhide's coup. That left two grandsons, both children, and a scramble among the surviving generals to control the clan's legacy. Hideyoshi convened a council of Oda retainers and offered a solution. Nobunaga's infant grandson Samboshi, later known as Oda Hidenobu, would be named heir, and Hideyoshi would act as a guardian to guide the young boy's future. It was a masterstroke. By placing himself as protector of the Oda bloodline rather than a usurper, Hideyoshi diffused accusations of ambition and cloaked his power grab in loyalty. Some retainers accepted this arrangement, but not all. Shibata Katsui, loyal to another of Nobunaga's sons, resisted. Conflict became inevitable. In early 1583, Katsui and Hideyoshi clashed at the Battle of Shizugataki. The campaign was swift and brutal. Hideyoshi's forces, fast-moving and disciplined, routed Katsui's troops and captured key fortifications. In a dramatic turn, Katsui, facing total defeat, retreated to his castle and committed seppuku. His wife, Nobunaga's sister Uichi, took her own life with him. The victory at Shizugatake eliminated Hideyoshi's most dangerous rival and cemented his status as the de facto leader of the Oda coalition. Yet Hideyoshi's rise was still incomplete. Another threat loomed in the form of Tokugawa Ieyasu, a shrewd and patient daimyo who had once been Nobunaga's ally. Unlike Katsui, Ieyasu did not openly challenge Hideyoshi's authority, at least not at first, but tensions simmered beneath the surface. In 1584, Ieyasu offered sanctuary to another of Nobunaga's sons and set up a competing base of power in the east. The result was a tense standoff that escalated into the Battle of Komaki and Nagakute. The campaign was indecisive in terms of military outcome. Hideyoshi's forces captured some territory, but Ieyasu's army defeated a key detachment, and neither side could claim complete victory. However, the deeper reality was more political than martial. Hideyoshi realized that a protracted war with Ieyasu, who ruled vast, economically strong domains, could be a costly mistake. Rather than continue the fighting, Hideyoshi turned to diplomacy. In a brilliant maneuver, Hideyoshi proposed a marriage alliance. He offered his mother's sister's granddaughter in marriage to Ieyasu's son, and publicly recognized Ieyasu's position in the eastern provinces. Ieyasu, ever calculating, accepted. In doing so, he acknowledged Hideyoshi's supremacy while retaining his own autonomy in his home domains. It was not a conquest, but a compromise, one that bought Hideyoshi valuable time. He had neutralized his most dangerous rival without bloodshed and brought a semblance of peace to a country still reeling from Nobunaga's fall. For now, the unification process could continue. With the political chessboard under his control, Hideyoshi turned his attention toward legitimacy. Despite all his victories, he still lacked one thing that most daimyo took for granted: noble status. Without it, he could not officially hold many of the positions needed to govern Japan under imperial authority. But Hideyoshi, ever the master of optics and persuasion, knew how to change that too. He petitioned the imperial court in Kyoto, which, though largely symbolic by this time, still held the power to grant titles. Through careful diplomacy, generous gifts, and political maneuvering, Hideyoshi secured recognition. In 1585, he was formally appointed Kampaku, or imperial regent, a role traditionally reserved for the highest aristocracy. A peasant-born general had now become the political head of the nation. From sandal-bearer to regent of Japan, Hideyoshi's journey was unlike anything the country had ever seen. But the work of unification was far from finished. Major clans still resisted in the south, and the northern regions remained outside his control. The time had come to move from diplomacy back to war, and Hideyoshi would do so not only with the authority of a ruler, but now with the divine blessing of the emperor himself. Now vested with the title of Kampaku and full imperial backing, Toyotomi Hideyoshi stood as the unchallenged ruler of central Japan. Yet his ambition was far from satisfied. The dream of national unification, once Nobunaga's and now his own, was incomplete. The southern island of Kyushu and the rugged northeast remained fragmented, ruled by powerful clans who had no intention of yielding without a fight. Hideyoshi's next great campaign would unfold in the west. The Shimazu clan, based in Satsuma, modern-day Kagoshima, had steadily expanded their control over Kyushu, defeating rival lords and absorbing territory at an alarming pace. They were fiercely independent and proud of their lineage, tracing their roots back to the earliest samurai. To Hideyoshi, they represented both a military obstacle and a test of his authority as the unifier of Japan. In 1586, he launched a full-scale campaign against the Shimazu. It was a massive undertaking, involving tens of thousands of troops from allied clans, coordinated supply lines, and careful political planning. Hideyoshi, ever the strategist, used both carrot and stick. He extended offers of peace and noble titles to potential allies while dispatching overwhelming force to those who resisted. The Shimazu, initially defiant, soon found themselves cornered. Hideyoshi's army, better equipped and far larger, captured key positions and steadily drove them southward. Facing certain defeat, the Shimazu surrendered in 1587. Unlike Nobunaga, who might have executed the Shimazu leadership, Hideyoshi spared them, absorbing them into his new order and preserving their prestige in exchange for obedience. Kyushu was now under central control. With the western front secured, Hideyoshi turned his eyes to the Kanto region, where the powerful Hojo clan remained defiant behind their fortress of Odawara. Known for their wealth and discipline, the Hojo ruled over a wide swath of eastern Japan and had carefully avoided open conflict, but their refusal to formally submit to Hideyoshi's rule had become an open provocation. In 1590, Hideyoshi launched what would become his largest and most ambitious campaign, the Siege of Odawara. Unlike most sieges, Odawara was not marked by immediate violence. Instead, Hideyoshi surrounded the city with a colossal army, some 200,000 troops, and built a veritable festival town outside its walls. Musicians played, dancers performed, and theatrical plays were staged daily. The spectacle was as psychological as it was strategic, meant to demoralize the defenders and display the new order Hideyoshi intended to build. After months of isolation and dwindling supplies, the Hojo surrendered. Their leader, Hojo Ujimasa, committed seppuku, while the clan's remaining holdings were seized. In the aftermath, Hideyoshi awarded the conquered Kanto region to a trusted ally, Tokugawa Ieyasu. It was a calculated decision. Though Ieyasu was powerful, giving him a distant region to govern kept him occupied and geographically removed from the political heart of Kyoto. Hideyoshi believed he had both placated and neutralized the cunning daimyo. With the defeat of the Shimazu and the Hojo, Hideyoshi had achieved what had eluded countless warlords before him. He had unified Japan. But unification was not merely about warfare. Hideyoshi now turned to governance. In the years that followed, he implemented a series of sweeping reforms designed to stabilize the country and solidify his legacy. He issued the Sword Hunt Edict, disarming the peasantry and reinforcing the distinction between warrior and farmer. He conducted a national land survey, standardizing taxation and land ownership. He reorganized administrative boundaries and appointed loyal retainers to oversee strategic regions. He even built the opulent Jurakudai Palace in Kyoto, a symbol of power that rivaled the imperial court itself. Yet for all his success, Hideyoshi could not forget one fundamental truth. He had no samurai lineage, no noble blood. His power rested on charisma, conquest, and clever politics, but it remained fragile in the eyes of the aristocracy. He sought to overcome this through symbolic acts, such as adopting the prestigious family name Toyotomi, bestowed by the emperor in 1586. It was a new clan created for a new order. Still, Hideyoshi's mind was already drifting beyond the shores of Japan. His ambition, it seemed, had no borders. He began speaking of conquest not just over lords and provinces, but over kingdoms beyond the sea. By the early 1590s, Hideyoshi stood at the height of his power. Japan was unified under his rule, its daimyo pacified or loyal, and the imperial court legitimizing his reign with honors and titles. But power, once achieved, must be maintained, and Hideyoshi, never content with mere consolidation, now turned his gaze outward. His next ambition was bold, some would say delusional, to conquer Ming China. But before he could reach the continent, he needed to march through the Korean peninsula. Hideyoshi saw the campaign as both a military venture and a political solution. By launching a foreign war, he could keep Japan's warrior class occupied and loyal, preventing rebellion. He believed the Korean kingdom of Joseon, lacking Japan's recent unifying experience, would fall quickly and serve as a stepping stone into China. He vastly underestimated the resistance he would face. In 1592, Hideyoshi dispatched his forces to Korea in what became known as the Imjin War. The first wave of the invasion was overwhelming. Japanese troops landed at Busan and surged northward, capturing Seoul and advancing rapidly toward Pyongyang. Korean defenses, initially disorganized, collapsed under the weight of Japan's experienced and disciplined samurai. But Hideyoshi's dream of swift conquest quickly unraveled. The Korean Navy, under the command of Admiral Yi Sun-sin, proved to be an insurmountable obstacle. Using innovative turtle ships and superior naval tactics, Yi cut off Japanese supply lines and shattered their dominance at sea. Without secure logistics, the Japanese army, though powerful, began to overextend. Even more disastrous for Hideyoshi, Ming China intervened to protect Korea. Chinese reinforcements poured into the peninsula, turning what had been an invasion into a brutal war of attrition. Battles were fierce and protracted, with massive casualties on all sides. Korean guerrilla fighters and local resistance movements added to Japan's mounting difficulties. Hideyoshi, who remained in Japan and directed the campaign remotely, grew increasingly frustrated. His orders became erratic. He sent more troops, drained the coffers of the state, and clung stubbornly to the idea of eventual victory, even as reports of failure accumulated. The war dragged on for years. A brief truce in 1593 was followed by renewed hostilities in 1597, known as the Second Invasion of Korea. But by then, Hideyoshi's health was deteriorating. He was aging, often bedridden, and consumed by paranoia about succession and legacy. Back in Japan, his court became increasingly anxious. The massive expense of the Korean campaign had strained the economy, and the continuous losses eroded morale. Many daimyo questioned the point of the war, but none dared defy him openly. Still, Hideyoshi refused to admit defeat. Until the very end, he insisted that the conquest of China remained within reach, that the setbacks in Korea were merely temporary. But time, as always, was merciless. In 1598, after 6 years of warfare, Toyotomi Hideyoshi died in his castle at Fushimi, surrounded by trusted retainers and consumed by the knowledge that his great overseas dream had failed. He was 61 years old. His death was kept secret for weeks to prevent unrest. When it was finally announced, the Japanese forces in Korea were quietly ordered to retreat. The Imjin War, costly and futile, had accomplished none of its original goals. Korea remained independent, China remained unconquered, and Japan was left deeply scarred. The war had claimed hundreds of thousands of lives and drained the nation's resources, but more critically, it left a power vacuum that would soon reshape the entire country. As Hideyoshi's body was laid to rest, Japan mourned the man who had risen from obscurity to unify a nation, but already the seeds of the next great struggle were taking root. Toyotomi Hideyoshi had conquered nearly everything, except time. Though he had risen from humble beginnings to become the unifier of Japan, his death in 1598 left a precarious and fragile legacy. His only surviving son and heir, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, was just 5 years old at the time of Hideyoshi's death, far too young to rule. This posed a dire problem. Japan had never been a true hereditary monarchy under samurai rule, and without a strong adult to continue Hideyoshi's leadership, the political structure he had built began to wobble. In anticipation of his death, Hideyoshi had created a council of 5 elders composed of the most powerful daimyo to act as guardians for his young son and maintain order until Hideyori came of age. The most prominent of these was Tokugawa Ieyasu, a cunning and ambitious lord who had served under Nobunaga and been both an ally and rival to Hideyoshi. Hideyoshi hoped that a balance of power among the 5 elders would prevent any single lord from dominating, but he had underestimated Ieyasu's political acumen. As the years passed, cracks formed in the alliance. Ieyasu, based in Edo, began consolidating power quietly, forging alliances and building up his military strength. Other lords, some resentful of the Toyotomi and others opportunistic, gravitated toward him. By 1600, just 2 years after Hideyoshi's death, the country stood on the brink of civil war again. The decisive clash came at the Battle of Sekigahara, one of the largest and most important battles in Japanese history. Tokugawa Ieyasu led the Eastern Army, while the Western Army was led by Ishida Mitsunari, a staunch supporter of the Toyotomi legacy. Although Ishida fought in Hideyoshi's name, Hideyori himself remained absent from the battlefield, a critical political and symbolic misstep. The battle was hard fought, but ultimately a triumph for Ieyasu, thanks in part to betrayal within Ishida's ranks. Victory at Sekigahara gave Ieyasu undisputed control over Japan. In 1603, he was appointed shogun by the emperor, founding the Tokugawa shogunate, which would rule Japan for over 250 years. Though Hideyori still lived, his role was reduced to that of a symbolic relic of a bygone regime. He and his mother, Yodonokata, or Chacha, were allowed to remain in Osaka Castle, under the watchful eye of the Tokugawa, but Ieyasu, ever wary, saw Hideyori as a threat. As Hideyori came of age, he began to gather support from those still loyal to his father's memory. Ieyasu, now retired but still controlling politics behind the scenes, feared the boy might one day challenge the new order. In 1614, Ieyasu accused Hideyori of plotting rebellion and launched the siege of Osaka, beginning with the Winter Campaign. Although peace was negotiated, the Toyotomi retainers used the truce to refortify. The final blow came in the summer campaign of 1615, when Tokugawa forces stormed Osaka Castle. After a brutal and fiery battle, Hideyori and his mother committed suicide. With their deaths, the Toyotomi line ended, and with it the last remnants of Hideyoshi's legacy as a ruling power. Yet Hideyoshi's influence endured in more subtle ways. The unification of Japan, the social reforms he enacted, and the rigid class structure he imposed remained intact under the Tokugawa. His economic and cultural contributions, urban growth, infrastructure, patronage of the arts left marks still visible in Japanese society. Hideyoshi had dreamt of eternal glory. While his dynasty did not survive, his legend did. The peasant who became regent, the man who defied the odds and bent the samurai world to his will, remains a symbol of ambition, brilliance, and the volatility of power. The sun had set on the Toyotomi, but not on Hideyoshi's place in history. From peasant origins to the imperial regent, or Kampaku, and the de facto ruler of all Japan, Hideyoshi's life seemed to defy the rigid social hierarchies of his time. In a society where birth defined destiny, he rose through sheer force of will, cleverness, and loyalty. To this day, his meteoric rise remains unmatched in the annals of Japanese history. Hideyoshi's legacy is a complex tapestry woven with both light and shadow. On one hand, his political genius unified a nation torn apart by over a century of civil war. Through diplomacy, marriage alliances, ruthless military campaigns, and calculated reforms, he accomplished what many warlords only dreamed of. He brought order to chaos. His policies brought long-term stability to Japan. He froze the social classes, forbade peasants from bearing arms, and strengthened the central authority. These reforms would later be co-opted and maintained by the Tokugawa shogunate for over 2 centuries. In many ways, Hideyoshi laid the foundation of Edo period Japan, though it would not bear his name. Culturally, Hideyoshi was a patron of the arts. He helped popularize No theater, encouraged tea ceremony masters like Sen no Rikyu, and built grand architectural works including Osaka Castle. He oversaw infrastructure development, roads, canals, and urban planning that helped boost trade and agricultural production. Under his rule, the Japanese economy flourished. And yet, his legacy is marred by darker elements. His invasions of Korea from 1592 to 1598 were disastrous. They caused widespread suffering and failed to achieve their objectives, leading to massive loss of life on both sides. Korean cities were razed, civilians killed, and cultural artifacts looted. The campaigns ultimately weakened Japan's treasury and exhausted many of its best generals. His invasions of Korea from 1592 to 1598 were disastrous. They caused widespread suffering and failed to achieve their objectives, leading to massive loss of life on both sides. Korean cities were razed, civilians killed, and cultural artifacts looted. The campaigns ultimately weakened Japan's treasury and exhausted many of its best generals. At home, his paranoia grew with age. His purges were brutal. Close allies and loyal retainers were sometimes executed on suspicion alone. He had his nephew and potential heir executed along with his family to prevent any challenge to his infant son. While some argue these actions were necessary to protect his legacy, others see them as the acts of a man who feared the same ruthless ambition in others that had propelled him to power. Still, it is the contradictions in Hideyoshi's life that make him so fascinating. He could be humble yet arrogant, generous yet cruel, a lover of refinement who waged brutal war. He revered the imperial court and Buddhist tradition, yet desecrated sacred temples in his quest for control. He rose with nothing and died with everything, only to have it all collapse in the hands of his child. Today, Toyotomi Hideyoshi is remembered not merely as a warlord, but as a visionary whose ambition shaped the course of a nation. His name is etched alongside Oda Nobunaga and Tokugawa Ieyasu as one of the 3 great unifiers of Japan. Statues of Hideyoshi still stand across the country, from Nagoya, where he was born, to Osaka, his military capital. His life has been dramatized countless times in novels, TV series, and kabuki plays. In Japan's national memory, Hideyoshi is often referred to by his childhood nickname Saru, the monkey. It was a teasing name given by Nobunaga, and Hideyoshi wore it with ironic pride. But history remembers him not as a jester, but as a general, a statesman, and a symbol of boundless ambition. In the grand stage of Japan's feudal history, Toyotomi Hideyoshi did not merely play a role, he rewrote the script.